So welcome this week for another retouching tutorial. It's not really a retouching tutorial. What I'm gonna do is just take you with me through the retouch of this image. So let's jump straight into Photoshop after the intro. Well, when we open this image up in Photoshop, what we can do is zoom in on this image. And you can see this spot has to go. Let me just make a quick selection from it in a color like reddish. Normal brush, let's go for red. And let's just make the flow 100. So the things we have to retouch is this little part, this little thing, this little dot. This has to go, this has to go, all these thingies have to go. Nothing too crazy. Perhaps this little corner darkening, this has to go, that has to go. Nothing too crazy, nothing too fancy. The arm we might slim up a bit, and this little bow has to go. So that's one thing we will be adjusting. I'm not sure if I want to keep this line, so that's another thing I have to worry about. We will see what it says later on. So yeah, those are the things. So the first things first, I'm gonna duplicate my background layer. So I'm just duplicating it. I'm gonna zoom in and just take the regular healing brush and then just hold down Alt next to an area and then just paint over it. Now, I've mentioned this in my previous video. If you didn't see it, go check it out. It's about cleaning up your background and using the healing brush, the clone stamp, the patch tool, all those things together combined with content aware fill and content aware scale. So be sure to go and check that out. So I'm gonna clean this one up with my normal healing brush. Also in that video I explain you why I am using another kind of roundness on my brush instead of the normal round one. So just cleaning things up a bit. So all these things can be done with just one retouching brush. And you see me, every time you see the plus icon coming on the screen, it's me just pushing down the Alt key, so you see me sampling all the time. One important thing is that the texture you are using is texture that is the same as the area you are replacing it in. Because if you're doing this and you're using this texture, for instance here, it would be weird, it would not be okay. So just keep that in mind. Also, we're gonna leave those beauty spots. It's from her, so we're gonna leave it. There we go. So that's part one. Now, for cleaning this thing up, we can try some different things. What I'm first gonna try is just use Liquify to adjust the body shape. So I'm gonna merge everything together, keeping the layer stack beneath it so I can always go back. But the keyboard shortcut I'm gonna push now is Ctrl Shift Alt A. So it merges the layers beneath it, but makes a merged layer on top of it. When that's done, I'm gonna go to Filter, Smart Filter, convert for Smart Filter. This might take some time, but if you use smart filters, you have the ability to go back. So you can still adjust a Liquify or even adjust any filter you put on top of it. You can keep adjusting it without losing quality and without making it a permanent, definitive adjustment. So when you see this little icon next to it, it's changed into a smart object. And now we are gonna use Liquify. Normally I use the shortcuts, but because we are doing a little YouTube video, so what I'm gonna do is just make sure that when I drag this, the pressure and the density is not too high, because if it is too high, it would go too quick. So what I want to do is just make this line really nice and smooth. So nothing too crazy. There we go. a little bit here. And what I'm gonna do now is make sure that I make the arm a little bit thinner. Not too much, because Sharon is a plus size model, curvy model. But what I want to do is like freeze this thing. So I'm gonna freeze this part. So when I change some things up, I'm not gonna adjust the edges of this one. So I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. There we go. I might try to like take this a little bit up. Don't do too extreme changes. Keep it simple. Keep it minimum. There we go. Now I'm gonna remove the mask, so I'm gonna say none. And then you can see that over here something funky has happened. I'm gonna use the reconstruct brush, and then I'm gonna try to fix this little part. There we go. And then I hit OK. Now, like I mentioned before, because we are using a smart filter, you can always go back and adjust it as needed. Now that's done. You can see the difference, nothing too crazy. So what I'm gonna do now is make a new layer, and I'm gonna try to fix this little area here with a clone stamp with a low opacity. So what I'm gonna do is just like paint it in, and then I'm gonna take some texture from that part and paint it over so we don't see the adjustments too much. Now the same with the skin on this side. We want to like make sure that we don't see any liquefy going on. Also this part is a bit weird, so just holding down Alt and just painting over it should just do the trick. There we go. Now one thing to keep in mind, you don't want any repetitive patterns. So when we have repetitive patterns, you just want to go somewhere else and take some texture from over there. Just sample a lot, make sure there's a lot of difference in the image. So that's how we are this far. Now the edges from the lens correction, let's say, I want to adjust. So I'm gonna make a new layer, take a normal brush with a flow of like say 20%, sample next to it and just paint over it. The same here below, sample it and just paint over it. Nothing too crazy, but I'm gonna merge these two layers together. There we go. And then what I'm gonna do now is do some dodging and burning to make sure that all the uneven things in there are completely fixed. So this one was dodge, and this one is burn. So the key here is to use a small brush, not a small brush, but a soft brush with a 1% flow, so you can slowly, gradually build it up. Now I'm using the burn. I don't want the burn, I want to dodge. So for me, in my work, I do more dodging instead of burning, but that's something totally personal. And don't zoom in too much. Like normally you should do it like this. Now you can tell here by fixing it, it is a little bit brighter. So what I'm gonna do is take just the burn layer and just color it in. Now in here I want to have like a sharper edge, so that's what I'm creating now. There we go. And then we just move on. Now one of the things you can do is enhance the contrast. So we put a layer on there and we create some really hard contrast so we can see better what we are doing. So now I'm going back to the Dodge layer and I'm just painting slightly on top of it. There we go. Now when you see that this effect is too much, you can always lower it back or take an eraser and just mask it out. Now you can put a lot of time in this. It really depends on what you want to do or how you want to create your image. Now, I don't want to put too much time in this, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean this thing up because that's something really visible. There we go. And when you look to the layer mask, it looks like that. The same for the burn. Nope, not on that one. We want to do it on this one. That's too much. So there we go. Now if I group these two together, you can see the difference by just doing this for like a few minutes. You can tell the difference. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run an action, a frequency separation action. You can find them everywhere online. I've got mine from Flurn. If you don't know them, go check them out. So I'm just gonna run this one pretty quick. And there we go. Now between these two, I'm gonna make one blank layer. I'm gonna use a brush with a low flow from 1%. I'm gonna sample a color and then just paste on top of it. And important when using this thing, don't forget to sample, because when you are painting, you want to make sure that when you sample, that you sample enough so you don't make too much of the same thing, because then you make the image really flat. But you can tell by just seeing me painting here or what the difference might be. And there we go. So by just doing this little step, you can see the difference change. Now what I'm gonna do on top of this is make a new burn layer. I'm gonna drag this out of this thing, close this, and then with a brush, on a darker layer, I'm gonna paint with white to make some more definition again. Don't overdo it, just keep it smooth. It's just to define the edges a bit more, to give some more three-dimensional effect into the image. Now again, as I mentioned before, don't overdo it. Like I can tell now I overdone it, so what I'm gonna do is smoothen this out by just hitting a Gaussian blur on top of it. So probably something like that. And what I'm gonna do then is just lower the opacity like so. So it has some more definition in it. Now, we've did some burning. I also want to do some dodging because this line on this image is pretty important. So I'm gonna do it like that and then go up again. Now this is just normal anatomy, how a highlight would run. But again, keep in mind, don't overdo it. You want to keep it as smooth as possible. That's too much. Your best friend is undo. Gonna put some more light on here. And then I'm gonna group this again. I'm gonna call this contour. I'm gonna group these together. But you can tell the difference by just me putting this layer on and off, what it gives on the image. Now, the dodging layer is a bit too much. So normally you should name it, but yeah, I'm not doing that because I know what I'm doing. Now, if myself 30 years later from now opens it up, it will be a mess to find out where everything is going. But for now, this is just fine. The only thing I'm gonna do is feather it a bit so it's a little bit smoother. Yeah, there we go. And also for this one, I'm gonna feather it a bit. And then if we switch it on and off, yeah, that's subtle, that's perfect. And then when all these steps are done, what I'm gonna do is put a gradient map on top of it, click on it and select the normal from black to white. So you can play around with it, try different blend modes, like for instance soft light, that gives some contrast in the image. It's a bit too much, so I'm gonna lower it a bit and then I'm gonna create my own contrast in the image by just dragging these things from the... So basically on the left side you got your shadows, on the right side you got your highlights, and if you create an S-curve in between, so one in the dark part going down, one in the upper part going up, you create contrast. The more you drag this down, the more contrast you create. The more you drag it up, the more negative vibe you create. So now, for instance, if I want to make the image brighter, I just do this. If I want to make it darker, I just do this. Now this has something for me. I like it, a little bit moodier. But what I'm gonna do now is create an extra curve. Take my little handy thing and then just drag this one down, something like that. That's too much. Now with the arrow keys on your keyboard, you can tell how much you want it to be different. There we go. Now it's just a matter of taste, what you prefer. Like this is flat for me. I like it a little bit more punchy. Now I see a fold. I see here some errors that have been made in this layer. So I'm just gonna take a black brush and just paint over it. So I'm pretty sure that I don't have any weird things going on. There we go. And what I'm gonna do now, final step, is just adjust this little thing because it does this with a bump. So when I'm happy with the colors, my final step is make a merge layer, the step we learned before. So Control Shift Alt A. And then when you have this, it takes a little bit of time because it's merging all the layers. I'm not gonna change this one into a smart object. I'm just gonna hit Control Shift X to open up Liquify. And then I'm just gonna take out this little bump and make sure that I am on the right tool. And there we go. And like this, I'm happy with the image. Now, you could go further and eliminate all the blemishes in the skin, but I like it to be real. And this way it gives a certain reality to the image. Now, this is too much, but this was the contrast layer we had. Now, keep in mind, the more contrast you introduce into your image, the more work you will have later on. Because with emphasizing contrast, which creates a big difference between the brighter parts and the darker parts, the more contrast you create, the more uneven things you will see. So this can even be smoothened down now. Like we did one frequency separation, on top of this we could even do a second one to eliminate all the differences. Let's, for the sake of the tutorial, just do this. So I'm just gonna rename this to make sure that it doesn't mess up everything. So what I'm gonna do now is just use my frequency separation when I see it. Yeah, this one. That's the one I've made, so it does everything automatically. There we go, 4.6. The radius is dependent on the image you're using, so... And then I'm gonna take a brush again. And then I can start painting again, but you don't want to make it too smooth. That's one thing to keep in mind. Because now you can see it starts to get really smooth. You don't want that. So if you want it, you can do this step. I'm not gonna do it. I'm happy with the results I've got here. So that's it for now. And yeah, if you got questions about this retouch, quick retouch, get in touch with me in the comments. Give me a like if you really like this content. If you want more retouching tutorials or retouching walkthroughs, yeah, subscribe to the channel, and then I'll see you when I see you, which is next week. Ciao, ciao.